She sat in the courtroom in Broward County, Florida, her expression cold, barely reacting as the jury announced its verdict as if that day's hearing were just another routine proceeding, rather than the moment that would decide how many years of her life she'd spend behind bars for flying thousands of miles just to cause a 23-year-old woman she had never even met to lose her life in her own apartment. Thompson herself, testifying in her own defense, claimed she'd only flown to Florida to have a woman-to-woman conversation with Kayla Hodgson, and that it was Hodgson who attacked her with a piece of glass while she was pregnant, leaving her no choice but to act in self-defense. She even claimed she'd blacked out during the struggle, but the prosecution immediately pointed to something that claim of self-defense couldn't explain. The meticulous planning down to every detail, a wide-brimmed hat, a face mask, gloves, and a fake Uber account created solely to reach the victim's apartment at 5 a.m. At first, the self-defense argument seemed reasonable. The jury considered it, but then the prosecution presented layer after layer of evidence, and everything changed in just about an hour of deliberation. What you're about to see is the moment the jury realized that a woman who genuinely just wanted to talk wouldn't need a disguise to avoid being recognized, wouldn't need a fake account to hide her identity, and certainly wouldn't need to change into the victim's own clothes and clean up the crime scene before leaving the apartment. And every detail you're about to see has been verified through the Tamarack Police Department's investigative files, flight and phone records presented by the prosecution in court, Sakiyna Thompson's own testimony, and the official sentencing handed down on the 1st of December, 2025. This is a case that sent chills through the entire Tamarack, Florida community. A woman living thousands of miles away in New York had planned it all out, booked a flight, and disguised herself carefully just to confront a young woman whose only connection to her was dating the same man. If you've never heard this story before, brace yourself, because what happened in Tamarack, Florida, in the early morning hours of the 13th of July, 2022, will challenge everything you thought you knew about how far jealousy can push a person and about just how meticulously a cross-state trip can be planned out. To understand why Sakiyna Thompson was sentenced to life without parole after the jury deliberated for just 1 hour, we have to go back to the beginning, to the love triangle between Thompson, her ex, and Kayla Hodgson, up to the fateful early morning when everything fell apart. In the borough of Queens, New York, in the neighborhood of Springfield Gardens, a Jamaican immigrant named Sakiyna Thompson had built a life for herself far from the sunshine of South Florida. At some point in her past, she had been in a relationship with a man, one that ended the way many relationships do, quietly and without lasting consequence, or so it seemed. That man moved on, and he began dating a 23-year-old woman named Kayla Hodgson, a flight attendant who also worked as a bartender at special events across Miami-Dade and Broward counties. Hodgson had recently settled into a new home at the Tamarack Village Apartments, a residential complex along Northwest 57th Street in Tamarack, Florida, building a life that, by every account, was full of promise. For Thompson, watching that relationship unfold from a distance became something she could not simply let go of. Jealousy took root, and it grew. The breaking point came when she discovered that Hodgson had blocked her on social media, a small digital gesture that, for Thompson, seemed to represent something much larger. At the time all of this was building, Thompson was 2 months pregnant, a detail that would later become central to the story she told in her own defense. What followed was not an impulsive act of rage carried out in a single, unguarded moment. According to prosecutors, in the days before the killing, Thompson booked a flight from New York down to South Florida, and she did so, they argued, with the specific intent of confronting and killing Kayla Hodgson. She prepared carefully. She assembled a disguise designed to keep her identity hidden, and she set up a fraudulent Uber account, a digital trail built specifically to obscure her movements to and from the scene of what was about to happen. The early morning hours of the 13th of July, 2022, marked the moment everything Thompson had planned came together. At around 5 o'clock, using that fake Uber account, she arrived at the Tamarack Village Apartments. Security cameras in the area captured footage of a woman wearing a wide-brimmed hat, a surgical-style face mask, and gloves, approaching Hodgson's door in the hours before sunrise. Thompson asked to speak with Hodgson woman to woman, right there inside her home. Whatever civility existed in that opening moment did not last. The conversation turned tense almost immediately, circling back to the one subject that had brought Thompson there in the first place, the fact that Hodgson was now dating her ex. According to the criminal complaint, Thompson acted with what prosecutors described as a depraved mind, indifferent to human life, striking Hodgson with a sharp object in an assault that carried clear signs of premeditation. The New York Post reported that Thompson stabbed Hodgson dozens of times. When Thompson later took the stand in her own defense, she offered a different account, telling the court that Hodgson had grabbed a glass from a hookah pipe and slashed her across the stomach first, and that she believed her unborn child's life was in danger, prompting her to fight back. She also claimed she blacked out during the struggle, losing her memory of much of what happened next. Once it was over, Thompson used the same fraudulent Uber account to leave the scene and return to her hotel, as if nothing had happened. It would take hours before anyone realized what had taken place inside that apartment. A 911 call came in at around 3 in the afternoon that same day, nearly 10 hours after the attack is believed to have occurred, reporting an unresponsive woman inside a second-floor unit. The caller told the dispatcher there was a gash on the victim's neck. The specific identity of that caller was never widely disclosed in public reporting, though some accounts suggest it may have been a neighbor who discovered Hodgson in her critical condition. Deputies with the Broward Sheriff's Office responded alongside fire rescue crews. When they arrived and made their way into the apartment, they confirmed what the call had already suggested. Kayla Hodgson was dead. The following day, a neighbor named Frederick Thomas spoke to reporters gathered outside the complex, his words carrying the weight of a community in shock. "We need some justice," he said. "The person responsible needs to be caught." As detectives began piecing together what had happened, they turned to 3 key sources of evidence. Flight records showed that Thompson had traveled from New York to Florida just before the killing took place. Cell phone data placed her movements in a pattern that lined up with the timeline of the crime, and physical evidence recovered from inside Hodgson's apartment provided the final pieces investigators needed. Cross-referencing all of this information allowed detectives to connect Thompson directly to the murder, despite every effort she had made to disguise her identity and mask her digital footprint. On the 25th of July, 2022, investigators secured a formal arrest warrant for Sakiyna Thompson. Just over a week later, on August 3, she was taken into custody in the Springfield Gardens neighborhood of Queens, the very community she called home. From there, she was extradited to Florida to face a charge of first-degree murder. Court records laid out the foundation of the case against her, built around a pattern of calculated, deliberate behavior, a flight booked in advance, a disguise carefully assembled, and a fake Uber account used both to arrive and to escape. Prosecutors argued that these were not the actions of someone acting in the heat of the moment, but the steps of someone who had planned this attack well before she ever boarded a plane. Investigators continued to build their case around this same chain of evidence, layering in the security camera footage, phone records, and flight data that together painted a picture of premeditation. More than 3 years after Kayla Hodgson's death, the case finally reached trial inside a Broward County courtroom in Fort Lauderdale. Assistant State Prosecutor Tanya Johnson presented the state's case, emphasizing just how methodically Thompson had prepared for that morning. "Being violated in your own home, in the sanctity of your own home, is a scary thing," she told the jury. Jurors were shown body cam footage from responding officers and autopsy photographs that illustrated the brutality of the attack. Evidence meant to leave no doubt about what had actually happened inside that apartment. Thompson herself took the witness stand in her own defense. She told the court she had only gone there to talk, and she accused Hodgson of striking first, cutting her stomach while she was pregnant, an act she said made her fear for the life of her unborn child. She repeated her earlier claim of blacking out during the struggle, saying she had no clear memory of the killing itself. Her defense attorney argued there was no evidence she had brought a weapon with her, and pointed out that it was Hodgson who had led her into the apartment in the first place. Prosecutors countered by returning again and again to the same undeniable thread running through the entire case: the planned flight, the careful disguise, and the fraudulent Uber account used on both ends of the encounter. Taken together, they argued, these were not the choices of a woman defending herself in a moment of panic, but the calculated steps of someone who had traveled hundreds of miles with murder already in mind. On the 15th of October 2025, after deliberating for roughly 1 hour, a Broward County jury found Sakiyna Thompson guilty of first-degree murder. Inside the courtroom, Hodgson's family broke down in tears of relief, embracing one another after years of waiting. "We're just so thankful in this moment," one family member said, "that the jury was able to see the story for what it is." Sentencing followed on the 1st of December 2025. 10 family members and friends of Kayla Hodgson stood before the court to deliver victim impact statements, each one carrying years of grief into that room. Hodgson's cousin, Melanie John, told reporters afterward that what Thompson had done was wicked and evil, and that someone capable of that should never again see the light of day. Another family member expressed outrage over Thompson's blackout claim on the stand, questioning how she could waste the court's time with what they viewed as an implausible excuse. In the end, Sakiyna Thompson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first-degree murder of Kayla Hodgson. In the time since her sentencing, further details have emerged about Thompson's life behind these new circumstances. Court records indicate that custody of her child now rests with the child's father. Following her conviction, Thompson posted a profile on a website connecting incarcerated individuals with pen pals, writing that she considered herself wrongfully accused and refused to let her current circumstances steal her joy, a statement that suggested she continued to maintain her innocence even after being convicted by a jury and sentenced by a judge. For Kayla Hodgson's family, the case's conclusion brought a measure of closure after more than 3 years of uncertainty, even as the underlying tragedy, a life cut short by jealousy carried across state lines, remains a difficult story to fully make sense of. The death of Kayla Hodgson reveals how quickly jealousy, left unchecked, can turn into calculated violence. This was not a moment of sudden rage between two people caught in an unexpected confrontation. It was a plan carried across state lines, built on disguise and deception, aimed at a young woman simply for living her own life and moving forward after a past relationship ended. The clearest message from this case is that possessiveness toward an ex-partner's new relationship is never a private matter that resolves itself, and left to grow, it can become something no one can undo. This case is a stark reminder that online actions, a blocked account, a perceived slight on social media, can feel deeply personal to someone unwilling to let go, even when no real threat exists. It underscores the importance of recognizing obsessive behavior early, whether in oneself or in someone close, and seeking help before resentment turns into planning. For anyone watching this story unfold, the lesson is clear. Walking away from a relationship should mark an ending, not an invitation for someone else to control what comes next. Kayla Hodgson's death stands as a painful reminder of how far that refusal to let go can travel, and how permanent its cost can be.